Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a really great honour to be invited here to talk to everybody today. And I just need to say that I am only 6 months into the role. I'm very conscious that I'm in a room of experts, a lot of scientific and technical experts in this area. I am not. And also, I'm very aware that this is a policy area as well that is quite new to me. So I'm sort of reading a bit more from the script than I would normally read from. So again, bear with me. But maybe I could at times draw in some other parts of my experience into how we can move research into a policy and an advocacy space and actually get change for people. So I've already managed to lose, or have you got it, the zapper. Where's the zapper? Oh, here's the zapper, sorry. There we go. Now, why is asthma and lung interested in this space? Well, I mean, obviously, our base is that nothing should be going into your lungs other than beautiful, clean air. But we know that isn't happening. And we know that the impact for people is atrocious. And in fact, lung health in the UK is in an appalling state. You can see here, 1 in 5 of us will get a lung condition. Somebody dies every 5 minutes. It's the 3rd biggest killer. Most people are quite surprised when they hear that lung disease is actually the 3rd biggest killer behind cardiovascular and cancer, but it is. Now, the killer stat, I think, is the one that I was not aware of until I took up this job. We are the worst in Europe for lung health, by a long way. So the outcomes in the UK against all of our European sort of country partners, colleagues, whatever you want to call them, is the worst. And there is no reason why that should be. We should be able to do a lot better in this country with all the resources and with all the expertise that we have. So it is incredibly important to us that we tackle the drivers of poor lung health. And of course, cleaner air is part of that picture, a really important part of that picture, both in terms of inside the home and outside of the home. So, given that lung health in the UK is in such a poor state, you would think that there would be a certain amount of effort behind the public space in terms of driving research, driving change into correcting this appalling state of affairs. But actually, no. Only 2.5% of public research funding goes into lung health. And the impact of that means that people suffer poor lung health because they, A, can't get diagnosed, they can't get treated properly, but also importantly that the environment that they live in, the way that they live their lives is not optimized towards good lung health. And the facts and the stats that you need behind it to drive change there aren't necessarily all available to hand. And that's why the sort of work that you do is so important, because we need that evidence to drive change. You will know this, obviously. This is the stat that gets put out about the impact of poor air quality. 43,000 people a year, up to 43,000 are actually killed by poor air quality. It's not just lungs, it drives poor health in terms of cardiovascular, it drives poor health in terms of dementia, even in terms of diabetes, premature birth, etc. One of the things that I also talk about when I'm talking to other audiences about poor air quality and the impact that it has is we now know much more about the impact on, children very early on and indeed in utero. And we know that it is stunting lungs. And we need to talk in that kind of language to cut through to people, because if you are not developing your lungs in really early life, that's a lifelong impact. That's the sort of thing you can't catch up on. That's the sort of message that we need to be getting across to people about why this is such an important issue. In terms of the UK and the ability to escape poor air quality, you can see here that it's not very easy. 99% of the country population lives in areas where the air quality is below World Health Organization standards. That stat, in terms of our research, 40% of children are born in, or babies are born in hospitals where they're surrounded by toxic NO2. You know, that's an appalling situation to be in. And equally for things like, PM 2.5, we know that that is breaching areas right across the country. So you can see that there is a health emergency when it comes to air quality, but that urgency is not necessarily recognised everywhere, and that's one of the things that we try to work on. Now, in terms of who does it affect? This is a massive social justice issue because, simply speaking, the people that are most affected by poor air quality are the people who probably contribute the least to the toxicity of that air. And that should be something that we should all feel is totally unfair and really needs to be corrected. We know in terms of lung health that health inequalities are massive. There are real, in fact, in lung health, health inequalities are the biggest of all the health condition areas. They are driven, yes, by smoking as well, and some other environmental factors, but largely they are driven by a combination of poverty and the environment. And those things are contributing to poor air quality. So it's a really important social issue and social justice issue that we should address here. So one of the things that the charity is able to do is to kind of get the voices of people who are directly affected by these issues. Because when they're very abstract, and we need to deal with the research, the evidence, the science, going into policy. But what's the point of all of that? The point is the impact on people who are living with the impact of living in poor quality air. And so what we're able to do is actually hear from people about the impact on their lives. We have a helpline, and we get thousands of calls every year, and often people will talk about the impact of the air quality in terms of their experience of asthma or COPD, for example. And we also carry out a survey every year, and this year we had 12,000 respondents telling us about different aspects of their lives and what is affecting their experience of living with lung disease. So in our survey, which we've just crunched through for 2024, 84% out of the 12,000 respondents said that, told us what made their condition worse, and it's air quality. 84%. And they're actually recognising that. Now, we talk a lot about how people don't recognise that air quality is a real issue and they need to pay attention, but actually people with lung disease and lung conditions do recognise the impact of air quality. And there's a lot of people with lung conditions. So that's potentially a force to mobilise whenever we want to make change in this area. You can see how is it that it actually impacts on them. Well, yes, they're struggling to breathe, but also they avoid exercise. They don't leave the house. That's going to affect their education, their work, etc., etc. And of course, often it affects their mental health as well. These are all major issues that the government needs to address. The government is, keen on getting people back to work, for example, keen on people exercising and taking activity seriously. And if air quality is driving people away from those issues, then that's not in line with the government agenda. So again, this is a tool that we can use to persuade the government that air quality is actually an issue that they need to address because it fits in to their wider agenda. And this is an example of somebody, the direct impact on an individual. And it's the voices of individuals, I think, that needs to grab people, needs to grab their emotions and really explains what impact it has. And just imagine if you're a mother or a carer of a very young child and being in this situation and what that does to you. And some more voices about how people are impacted. So this is, when you're thinking about the work that you're doing, I'm sure you do think about this, but this is the reality of people living with poor air quality and what it does to their lives. And that's why it's so important to really get the evidence to change their situation. Now, interestingly, what do patients think about air pollution and air quality? And on what do they think impacts on that? Now, interestingly, that most people kind of recognise air quality and the impact from road transport, but actually very few of them thought about things like wood burning, for example, in cities. So there is a bit of a kind of misconception in the public space about where the sources are of air pollution, and that's something that we're going to need to really think about how we manage that conversation going forward. So how do we push the issue? The state of policy at the moment, well, as you probably know, currently our clean air targets are well below the World Health Organization level, and we would say that the ambition is just not reflected currently in our clean air targets. We have made progress over the last few years. There are clean air zones, there are LEZs across many cities. I live in one of those areas, so I know what it's like. Heard all the debates, very interesting. And we know that there are potentially reviews of the Environmental Improvement Plan and the Clean Air Strategy. In fact, I think it's more than intention. There is definitely going to be a review of the Clean Air Strategy, and that gives us a hook to push the agenda. So, how can we help with doing that? Well, you guys are going to provide us with the evidence base, hopefully. We need the evidence base, but it needs to be linked to why this is important to change. And one of the areas that we can help and contribute in is by pushing those stories of individuals who are affected by this. When you're a politician, you do occasionally listen to your constituents and what they might want. So this is a way of really getting those stories home. And this was a lovely piece of work that was done where we captured stories of people who are living in areas of poor air quality and used it to tell their story. There's some fantastic photographs. We did a big launch. That's the MP for Manchester in there, Azal Khan, I think his name is. I hope I got that right. What I love about this is that there's a range of people involved here, and there are young voices. And, the young people are the future here, and we've got to get their voices into this story. So we've did that launch, had a really good feedback, able to sort of push that out to the media, and we will be, hopefully, I think, taking that around the country. But these are the kinds of things that we can do to get the human interest and then start having the conversation about, what are the changes we need to see and what's the evidence for that. We also ran a stunt, I believe they're called, a campaign stunt. So we were very lucky to be funded to do that by part of the Healthy Air Coalition. And on the 12th of September, we went to some playgrounds in London and in Manchester and Birmingham. And the idea was to show that actually, remember back to that stat about the number of places that were affected by poor air quality? I think, again, it's something like 99% of all the playgrounds in the country have what would be called toxic air quality. So we're putting our kids into that space every day. I think the only place was some terribly remote village in the West Highlands somewhere that's probably got a gale, going at it all the time. So that's how bad it is. We taped off these areas. We did some work around, showing clean air monitors, showing, to people that were in that space what kind of impact, because probably some of them hadn't thought about it. But we do know from the people that we talk to that they are thinking every day, if they've got a child who's got asthma, can I take that child out actually to that play park? Because I know sometimes when they go there, they come back and they're finding it difficult to breathe. Or they're thinking, I'm actually going to have to think about the route I take to the play park because I've got to avoid the main roads, for example. So there's a terrible, what have we come to when a play park is a potentially sort of toxic area? That's not good. So off the back of this, we did social, we did media, etc., and we drove people to write into the PM, and we got 500 people write into the PM. And you can see some examples here. In London, I'll just tell you a little bit of an anecdote. In London, the first place that the team went to, it turned out to be it was on the South Bank on the river. And I think it was by the London Eye, and it turned out that it was a green area owned by Shell. And so maybe that was quite an interesting place to go and try and set this up. They were rapidly moved on, and the team ended up in a couple of other places. It did result in a phone call by the police to the charity a couple of days later. Apparently, we had slightly annoyed, completely unintentionally, and I think it's all good, one of the people that look after the park, and we had moved on when they had asked, etc. But it goes to show, it made an impact, and maybe we should be doing more of this kind of thing, because that's how a lot of other campaigns have actually pushed the agenda. So, collaboration. The charity, as a general rule, it always tries to work in collaboration with other people, other bodies, because we know it is going to be much more impactful. In this case, the Healthy Air Coalition, it was founded in 2008, as you can see, and it's got a long history of making an impact in the public space. We took over in 2022 the Secretariat, working very much with the whole coalition, and we were delighted to do so because it completely aligned with what we're trying to do for lung health. But also it broadened out the charity as well, because we're very much involved, for example, in talking about transport. And that would not necessarily be an area that we would normally be able to talk about, but working in a coalition, sharing understanding and knowledge and evidence, we're able to talk credibly about issues that we might not have been able to talk about before, and equally for the other partners in that coalition. So I think working in coalition is really good. We know from a government perspective that they would much rather talk to a single point of entry, as it were, to an issue than talk to many different organisations, maybe getting slightly different angles on things. It's really difficult as a government decision maker, as a policy maker, to engage with the huge range of civil society that there is. But if a coalition is there, that makes it much more easy for them to engage, and also gives credibility to what the main messages are. So you can see all the partners, and what's really interesting here is the health side together with the environmental side. And I think, that coming together, it's not, this is an issue that affects the environment, but it also affects health. And we're, kind of interdependent on each other, and we need to be working together to drive those messages home. So the objectives of the coalition, very much about uniting the clean air field and growing this movement to make more impact. Really showing how it is something that there are many different angles to this, there are many different agendas which can be aligned around it. The bigger we can grow it, the more impact we will have. And of course, we want to advocate for policy change. So pushing for new targets. I'm not quite sure, is that the last, I think that is the last Clean Air Act, is it? In 1956, somebody will probably tell me.
That's the first one.
That's the first one. Oh my God, have we had loads of others? Well, whatever. We're still not there yet, is the main message. We still need to do more. So I know that the coalition very much worked with Labour, who were keen on developing this policy area before the election, and some great sort of relationships and movements were made there. To the extent that a draft New Clean Air Act, the latest, I'm sure it won't be the last, was drafted. However, as you all know, quick election, it did not make it into the manifesto, nor did it make it into the King's speech. And there was actually only one bill that I think was, sort of, as we know, the Tobacco and Vapes bill was a bill that actually finally made it into the King's speech, which we were really pleased about. But sad to not see this here. But there are still opportunities. The Clean Air Strategy is a really good platform for us to get the messages over. And then maybe it does move into a Clean Air Act, but we've got to keep the discussions going. I think the critical thing with this government is that they have set out very clearly what they want to achieve in terms of their 5 missions. And they have set out very clearly that growth and productivity is incredibly important to them. And they've set out very clearly that prevention and keeping people out of hospital is really important to them. Now, a clean air strategy will certainly help with the latter, and we need to make that point really strongly and show how people we'll have fewer admissions, emergency admissions associated with asthma, for example, if we get better quality air. But we need to work the other side as well. So what is our line around growth and productivity when it comes to clean air? We need to make sure that we have a really good argument there, because there potentially some people could play a tension off between those 2 agendas that the government's got. Now, I think the argument is that obviously with people not having to take time off work because they're ill, not going into hospitals, not being made to the point where they're having to give up work, all of that plays into the productivity agenda for the government. Equally, technology associated with this area, it could drive innovation and technology industry around this area. So we need to be conscious about where the arguments are going to come from and where the challenges are for investment and meet those head on. So that's something that we need to work on. And in all of this, there is incredible importance for us in being credible in this space and having the research and the knowledge and the evidence to engage in those conversations at policymaker and at decision maker level. And that's where you guys come in. And I hope that we will be able to work in partnership with you going forward. It's really, really important to us. And I might just say two more examples around that, which I think are really pertinent. The Tobacco and Vapes Bill, which, as you know, is coming down the track, that's based on a 20-year at least, the whole campaign has been much, much longer, but it's been the last sort of 20 years really driving legislative change in this area, backed up at each stage by evidence. And the evidence about the science of the driving the poor health, but also the evidence about the social science around this, why people are prepared to accept, changes perhaps to the way that they live their lives in order to drive, better health in this area. And lots of work about public attitudes and how the public are behind this. Don't be put off, vested interests, don't be put off by, you know, big lobbying for vested interests, because actually the voices of the public aren't being heard, and we can gather that together and show that they are interested in this issue. It's quite an interesting journey to look at what's happened to smoking and see whether that can be replicated in clean air. And then the final one is another sort of example that's coming down the track with antimicrobial resistance, which is, as we all know, another public health major issue for the country, something that the public hasn't necessarily particularly engaged in at the moment. But interestingly, there is a move to develop the Fleming Institute, pushed by Lord Darcy, to drive the science around antimicrobial research. But in building this big centre, they're not just relying on the science, they are putting in you know, whole teams around policy, whole teams around how you engage the public behind it, because they realise the science on its own is not going to deliver that kind of major behavioural and public acceptance of big change. So I think that's really instructive for this space as well. Thank you.